I wanted to share with you this evening something that I hear in conversation, something that I see in my research, but most of all, something that I feel very deeply that is shifting. And this is what it is. We are more digitally plugged in and connected than we ever have been in the history of humanity. And yet at the same time, we are more disconnected and lonely and stressed out and anxious than we ever have been at any other time in humanity. And some would say, we got to do away with the technology. It's the technology that's doing it. We need to do less. We need to unplug. And what I would suggest, and what I deeply feel, is that it's not necessarily the technology, but how we're using the technology. And so what I feel in my heart, and what I'd like to share today, and what an amazing day to share it, as we connect locally and globally with women in San Francisco and all over the world, and hear these powerful messages, is how do we ramp up our own digital fluency to be able to create more meaningful connection. And so when I think of what is meaningful connection, I think of big, big questions that keep me up at night. I think about what needs to change. Who do we need to be in our workplaces, in our communities, in our schools? And what do we need to do to be able to have more meaningful connections in our lives? And if we had more meaningful connections, what is the kind of work that we could accomplish? And we've seen so many instances of that this evening. So the first thing I did, as this kind of feeling that has been mulling for me for probably 2 years now, is recently when I needed to put it all together, the first thing I did is I went and I looked, what is the definition of connection? And here was what I found. And it's okay. It talks about a relationship between a person, an experience, and a thing. But yet it's missing a piece for me, because when I look at the picture of the two people talking, that feeling, that to me is a feeling that I see of meaningful connection that I don't see in the definition of the words. And so I think about the tablets and the smartphones and the technology that we have, and I think about how that's evolved in my generation. There is still a phone like that in my mom and dad's house. So when I was growing up, that was what we used for communication and connection in a certain way. And that has evolved to the place that our phones are no longer just our phones. There are video cameras, there are GPSs, there are levels, there are alarm clocks. They become an extra appendage and something that we filter everything that we see in the world and how we find and connect with people and things and experiences. And so what's happened as this proliferation of this extra appendage that we have now, and in some countries you actually have more digital phones and smartphones than you have people, and I still don't get that one. But what's happened is there's now been this proliferation of social and digital sites where we can go and we can endlessly connect with experiences and people that will bring us, ideally, more joy and more meaning. And if you just want to take a quick look at this stat, what this is this is basically the increase in social networking sites, and this is only really in the past 8 or 9 years. And where we used to be at 5 or 6 or 7 or 8% of our various age groups connecting via these social sites, we're now 60, 70, 80, 90%. What does that mean? That means there's 60, 70, 80, 90% of the population that is out there making these connections, but are they meaningful? And I would suggest where we've come in our maturity in terms of the infancy, I think, that we're still at in how we use digital and social to connect, is that we're collecting friends and fans and followers like we collect hockey cards. And even for myself, in the 5 years that I've started my business, in the beginning, I totally thought I had to be there, and I was convinced by the people that I trusted and respected to give me guidance and mentorship when it came to marketing my business and building my business, that you had to be at this number where you had a certain number of followers or you had a certain number of friends, because that meant you had more influence, and if you had more influence, you were going to get more business and have more impact. And so I totally got caught up, and I think a lot of people got caught up in that 4 or 5 years ago. But I totally feel something's shifting. I know for sure it's shifting for me. I'm divesting myself of friends and followers and getting back to that small percentage that truly is a meaningful connection in business or personal. And I know more and more people are doing that. But this all culminated for me, I have to say, thinking about this talk, this actually all culminated for me about 10 days ago when I realized that Selfie is actually the 2013 word of the year. Every year, the Oxford University Press chooses a word that encapsulates culture, a snapshot in time. And normally, they actually have one word in the UK and Europe and one word in North America. And this year, for the first time, it's actually the same word all over the world. And how they measure this word, how they get to this place, is they simply look at the iterations of the number of times that this word or this concept is showing up. And for those of you who don't know what selfie is, that's me taking a picture of myself and then turning it around and sharing it on social media. And if you just Google images of selfies, it's unbelievable what you will see. And it has spawned shelfies where you're taking pictures of your bookshelf and sharing that, and God knows what else. But you're looking at a 17,000% increase in the use of that word and that concept since last year. What does that mean about our society and our desire for connection? We just heard a whole TED Talk on it. When we do this and then we put it forward, what are we asking for? But what's happening if you look at the percentage of people that are on social sites doing this, amongst other things, there's for sure meaningful connection. What it's doing is creating a tremendous amount of noise and a tremendous amount of superficiality. And what we're losing sight of is the opportunities for meaningful impact and meaningful connection. So it's getting noisy out there. And what I would suggest, and this is in my heart where I feel I'd love to start this conversation, is how this is not about Generation Y or Z or any other letter of the alphabet or boomers or zoomers. We are today Generation Connect. We are all, there's grandmothers on Facebook, and there's kids on digital, and there's all ages in between. We are the generation that has no boundaries. We are the generation that can access any amount of information, all of us. There is so much work to be done in the world. How do we increase our own digital fluency, our own maturity with how we interact with digital and social and technology to be able to make a more meaningful impact? And so I think of those two questions. I think of who do we need to be and what do we need to do? And the first place I think of that is in our workplaces. Who do we need to be in our workplaces as employers, as colleagues, as coworkers, as inventors and creators? Who do we need to be more digitally fluent and to connect more meaningfully? And what do we need to do? How does information flow in organizations? How do we collaborate in different ways? How do we build and create and remove hierarchy and silos and forget about the place where information is power and just because I'm the boss, I have the most information? Today in our Canadian workplaces, somewhere between 68 and 71% of the workforce is either apathetic or totally disengaged in their work. Look around the room. 68 to 71% really are waking up in the morning and not even remotely coming close to acting at their full potential. What would it look like if we were all more engaged? What would it look like if we were more connected to the work that we do, the people we work with, and the organizations that we work with? What would it look like in our schools? What would it look like in our schools? Who do we need to be as educators, and who do we need to be as students? I have 2 girls in elementary school, and I think about that all the time. How can digital and technology enable them to connect more deeply, not just to the people in the 4 walls of their classroom or the 4 walls of their school, but connect more deeply to the world around them? And when I look at kids today who can take an astronomy lesson from an astronomer or for an astronaut in space, or who can Skype with an equivalent age student in Africa and see the impact that they're making, what are the kinds of global and local conversations that we can generate? In our schools, when we teach our girls and our boys to code and to use responsible digital tools, what does that look like? What does it look like in our communities? Who do we need to be in our communities to embrace more openness and transparency and inclusion? And how can we leverage digital and social and technology to be able to help us get there and create more deep connections in our communities? I'll give you a specific example. There was a small community in the UK, and they held this hackathon with all these different members in their community of all different ages. And what they were trying to do is trying to come up with what are some big problems that we have in our community. And one of the really interesting ones that came up was this idea that there was actually a very small slice of the community, people who were 80 and older, who were actually excluded from the sort of community feel of community because they had less mobility, they were less able to get out of their houses. And through technology, what they were able to do is actually develop this app, essentially, where someone like myself, who wanted to volunteer and give back to the community a little bit, I would turn around and I'd be like, well, I'm cooking dinner anyways for my family of 4. And I could go on to this app, essentially, that the community created. And I could say, I'm cooking spaghetti and meatballs for 4. I'm actually cooking 6 portions, so I have extra 2 portions. And then someone on the other end who is in need of a little bit of connection and a meal, they would say, well, sure, I'd love to sign up for the spaghetti and meatballs. And then I package up 1 portion, and I actually hand deliver it to the person who's in the closest geographical location that has need. What does that do to create meaningful connection, person-to-person connection, through digital and social technology? And so when I think of who do we need to be, these are big, big questions. I do not have all the answers. When I think of what can each of us do, this is the stuff that I think about. First of all, each and every one of us think about, how can I have greater impact? Could I have greater impact if my digital fluency was a little bit more elevated than it was? What could I discover that I don't know now? Who could I connect with? What is the work I'm already passionate about, and who else is passionate about that world? If ever there was inspiring conversations that happen today, it's through technology that we are able to see them. And I'll show you how that connection happens, because the talk that we heard about the women in Africa and the technology and what they're building and creating, I was looking at the Twitter feed, and through the Twitter feed I saw a tweet of someone who made a tweet saying, so proud watching my boss on stage talking about, and the topic she was talking about. And I tweeted to her and I said, that's awesome, are you watching it live, or are you watching it sort of back from your country in Africa? And she said, no, I'm watching it live. So through technology, if I want to continue, I don't know if she responded, but I asked her, I said, I'm doing a talk in an hour, I'd love to know what you think about technology and communication and connectivity. So I'll see if she responds. But that's just one tiny example through a shared experience of us realizing that we are both inspired by the same talk. That's a person-to-person connection that can get made. Shared experience. We need to get better, not so much at broadcasting our lives and broadcasting our message. We need to get better at creating shared experience and communicating and connecting around shared experience. Probably one of my most powerful lessons as I was starting my business and looking at kind of communicating and sharing information was in 2008, I started my business. So 2009, I wrote a blog post, and the blog post was entitled, Leadership Lessons I Learned from Grief. And what it was a blog post. It was a very personal blog post that I decided to share because there really were so many powerful lessons that I had learned from the death of our first child. So we had an infant death, and that would have been her 4th birthday. And in that anniversary, I wrote this blog post, Lessons Learned in Grief. And that is, to date, the single most shared blog post that I wrote. And I didn't write it because I had a message to share anything. It was very personal. It's vulnerable. And through that shared experience, I was able to have women from all over the world who had also lost a child of different circumstance, different age group, different countries, that I'm still connected to today, that we still have a closed LinkedIn group that is just this group of 24 women that have this shared experience of losing a child. That's powerful, and that starts changing who I am because of what I've learned through those experiences that I never would have had if we hadn't had that connection via digital.